Good afternoon, marvellous mathematicians. My name is Tom Moore.
My name's Em Duncan.
And we are going to be presenting about open-ended questions and how to engage your students.
Good afternoon.
But before we do that, I first of all will tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm sure you'll share a bit about yourself as well. So my name's Tom, as I said. I'm an education pedagogy consultant for a company called Engage Me Mathematics, and I'm studying a PhD looking at how to engage students in mathematics, looking at relationships between teachers and students.
And I work with Maths Pathway as a school consultant, so my role is really helping our schools to get the most out of the Maths Pathway learning and teaching model.
Excellent. Well, do you want to share some of the things that are going on with Maths Pathway at the moment, Ed?
Yes, we've got some exciting things on the horizon. The first of those is a fantastic PD opportunity which is called Path 18, which will be held on the 28th and 29th of June. And this is a great opportunity for our Maths Pathway teachers to come together and share best practice and some ideas around teaching mathematics. So it's really a PD with a lot of sessions that are run by Maths Pathway teachers for Maths Pathway teachers. And Tom, you've attended before?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been for the last 2 years actually, and every time I go I always come away inspired by what other teachers are doing within the community, and always with a plethora of ideas that I can actually go and use within my class the very next day. So I've really enjoyed it, and I really encourage anyone who's thinking about it to go along and check it out.
Yes, and we'll share the link for registering for that event if you're interested in the comments below, or you can also head to our website, which is mathspathway.com/events to check out further information about that one. And something else that's exciting that I can share with you is our new community hub, which is something that we've just added to the Maths Pathway teacher portal. So once again, this is really about a source of collaboration for maths teachers to be able to come together, share enriched discussions, share the resources that they're finding really useful for their own classes as well. So I would definitely encourage those of you who are joining us from Maths Pathway schools to head on over if you haven't already and join in one of the discussions, check out the weekly videos, get involved in all that the Community Hub has to offer you.
That is one of the things that I really love about what's going on here at Maths Pathway, and that is the nature of the community. And it's not just about the company, but also how teachers get involved and they share ideas, because we're all trying to do the same job, and we're all really wanting to improve education and mathematics understanding for our students. And I love just how teachers really are keen to help each other out, even if they've never met each other before. And that Community Hub is a really good opportunity to do that.
It certainly is.
Excellent. Well, shall we make a start?
I think we will. And before we formally get started with today's webinar, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past, present and future.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, well, we're going to have a look at a presentation today called Engaging Students Through Open-Ended Tasks. And I'll go through, first of all, what engagement is with you. Now, engagement is, it consists of 3 zones really. You've got cognitive engagement, which is where students are engaged because of the challenge of the task. They're actually they're having to think really in order to be able to do it. And you may have come across a time where you've actually been cognitively engaged as well, where, you know, it's actually the nature of the task and it's a bit challenging, and that's what really gets you involved with it. The next type of engagement is effective engagement, and that occurs when you've got social dynamics occurring. So students are working with each other, or also where they can see the relevance of what they're doing to what their real life is like outside of school. So that's effective engagement. And the last type of engagement is operative engagement, and that's where students are simply engaged in doing the task itself. And you get this quite often with students who are really well behaved, but they might not necessarily be engaged with cognitively or effectively. So that is, they're just doing the work because they have to, and they just like being a good student. So that's sort of the operative engagement. And the key is to try and get all 3 forms of engagement happening at once, because it's all well and good for students to be doing the work, but we really want them to be engaged as well because they are, you know, challenged by it, and also because they can see the relevance to their own lives as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's such an important distinction to make between a compliant student and an engaged student. So a student that's compliant and actually participating in the task is not necessarily experiencing engagement on that deep level that we want them to.
Excellent. Now, this poses the next question, and that is, what comes first? Is it engagement or is it success? And I'd be interested actually to hear your comments because, and if you do have them, please write them in and jump in on the discussion as well.
Send them through.
Because I really feel like it's a bit of a cyclic nature, and we'll come back to this again later as well. But you know, some people think, all right, well, to get students engaged first so that they then have a go at what's happening so they can experience success, well, that's maybe how it starts. But then also there's an argument that students need to experience success first so that they can then become engaged.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I can certainly see that it has got that cyclic nature to it. And I think initially I would feel that there needs to be some level of engagement for students to actually tap into a task enough to experience success. But by the same token, I think the success is so integral in actually fostering that deeper engagement that we're talking about as well. So yeah, it's got to start somewhere, I suppose.
That's it.
So.
Maybe it's just a matter of choice, I guess. Maybe
Well,
it's about getting to know your students and getting them to experience success, or maybe you just want them to engage in an activity which will then do that. We're not going to be able to answer this exact question for you. There we go. We're not going to be able to answer this exact question for you right now, but we will come back to it later as well. Now, in terms of engagement, Dr. Catherine Attard has gone through and developed a framework for engagement in mathematics. And she says that, and what she's found is that this is actually can be used to help engage students, but I also feel that can help to promote success as well. And you'll see why. Because pedagogical relationships are part of a framework for engagement in mathematics. And when you develop pedagogical relationships, it means the relationships between the teacher and the student, but also the relationships between students as well. Now, in terms of relationships between the teacher and the student, well, there's things that need to happen here. For example, the teacher really needs to know the student well. So that is their ability levels and their backgrounds and interests and their strengths as well in different areas. And when they know that, then they can use those in their pedagogical repertoires. Those are the types of activities that they use. Now, by knowing the students, you can then target your teaching to them. And also you can allow them to then make connections between concepts and also give them choice and variety as well, especially, like I said, when you know your students. So those pedagogical relationships really are crucial in order to develop engagement, but also success.
So how does that fit in to teaching in a maths class? Well, I suppose really we can think about this in two main areas. And the first of those is in terms of targeted teaching. So making sure that all of the instructional activities that we're running with students are actually really targeted, as Tom has mentioned, to the needs of the students that are in that class. The other side of that we're going to look at is open learning. So they're those opportunities for students to develop those pedagogical relationships, both with the teacher and with each other, and really sort of tease out and explore mathematical ideas in a little more detail. So if we're looking more just at the targeted teaching side of things, we're really looking at individualised learning. So being able to, as we've already mentioned, differentiate the tasks so that they really suit the needs of the students that we have within the room. We'd also be looking at ongoing feedback from the teacher to the student as well, which of course is going to play a really important part, again, in those pedagogical relationships. So you can see this is all really tying in quite nicely. Over on the open learning side, we've got things like rich learning tasks where we have that nice low floor, high ceiling so that we're really expanding and opening up that task so that every student in the class is able to access it and really get something meaningful out of it. As well as that, we've got projects which tap into some of the same ideas as our rich tasks, but they happen over a longer time span so that they can sort of go into a little bit more depth again. Then we've got this nice little spot in the middle where we want to have that crossover between our targeted teaching and our open learning. And within that spot, we can fit some sort of data-driven group teaching activities, which we're going to refer to as mini lessons. So that's a really sort of key spot where we can have, I suppose, more of a concept level or concept-based teaching practice and discussion for students. And we can still use those open learning approaches within those mini lessons, but we know that we're going to be sort of focusing on a smaller group of students.
So in today's session, we're going to really look and focus on the open learning section, as you can see here. And what we're going to do is actually really look probably at things that you can use in your mini lessons, but the same strategies and ideas you can then take on to using in your projects and also your rich learning tasks as well, because it's the same approaches and the same way of thinking about things for all three. But really, this works exceptionally well for the mini lesson side of things when trying to open up what is normally a closed question into a much more open format.
Yeah. So how does that fit into our maths pathway learning and teaching model structure? Well, there's lots of ways that you can actually use the data that's available to you on the teacher portal to actually be able to structure those mini lessons really effectively. And as we said, we want these lessons to really be data driven and to meet the needs of the students that we're working with in those groups. So you can group your students by key concept. Those of you who are joining us from Maths Pathway schools may already be familiar with some of those tools. We've also got banks of fantastic rich tasks that are stored within the Maths Pathway teacher platform as well. These tasks have been written for us by Dan Finkel, who runs the Math for Love website, and they're a great resource that's available to teachers. And once again, we really would encourage you to hit up the Community Hub as well as another way of sharing resources and getting in touch with what other teachers are using. And if you've got any sort of open learning activities that you find work particularly well that you'd like to share with us today, please feel free to jot those into the comments as well.
And just in regards to the mini lesson side of thing as well, within the Maths Pathway teacher portal, it's really important that we run mini lessons based on key concept rather than on a module, because you can think, oh, well, I've got a few students who are working on this particular module, I want to run a lesson. But the key element to a mini lesson is the fact that you've got students of a range of abilities coming in so that the discussion can then occur so students can learn from each other. So it really is important to group by key concept, because then that brings in students of a range of ability who are addressing modules within each key concept.
And that's the true nature of open learning, isn't it? We don't want to just be restricting it to a specific ability group.
That's it. All right, well, let's now have a look at open-ended questions, and I'll go through some of the key characteristics that you'll find about open-ended questions. First of all, they focus on a process. So that is, we're more interested in what's actually, or how students are going about answering the question rather than what the actual answer is. The next thing is they focus on collaboration and discussion. So when we're talking about the focus on process, well, that's a great opportunity to get students to talk about how they went through and tried to solve the problem. Now, they'll find out that some methods didn't quite work. They'll find out that other methods are much better. But it's that conversation and the discussion that really can help students to learn from each other as well. The next thing is they promote problem-solving strategies. Now, problem-solving strategies are things like acting it out. Can I try the problem in another way? Is there a simpler version of the problem? There's a whole range of different strategies that you can get by just simply typing them into a Google search. And they definitely come up within, you can get a worksheet or a poster that comes out from Maths 300, and that talks about the different problem-solving strategies. So that's worth checking out as well. And students will use these in a range of different ways to try and solve problems. And you might find that there may be different problem-solving strategies that they can use in order to solve the one problem. The next thing is open-ended questions generally have more than one solution. And that's great, because if you've got more than one way of solving it and then more than one solution, then once again, it means that students can really take the task and take some ownership of it and really, I guess, explore it and see where it goes for them too. As I've sort of alluded to before, there's many ways to solve, so that's through different strategies, and there's many different answers, and also there's different processes in order to be able to solve as well. And then the next thing is it can give you, the teacher, some insight into their misunderstandings or the students' misunderstandings and gaps in their knowledge. Because you've got an open-ended question and they're going about it in different ways, by simply watching them, you may pick up on little things that they are missing along the way, and you can then target your teaching to them at that point in time. Whereas if they've just gone through and trying to answer a closed question, there's really only one way to solve it, and you're not actually seeing all of the other things that they may or may not understand throughout as well.
Yeah, and understanding or picking up on misunderstandings and gaps and that sort of thing can be a great thing that students can do for themselves as well. well when you're engaging in this more open learning situation, because it's quite often you'll find that through that collaboration and discussion, and if students are having to justify their answers and justify their thinking out loud, quite often they'll be able to correct their own misconceptions as they go. So it's a really great way to tie those things in together.
That's it. And they're learning from each other too through those conversations. And the other thing, I guess, is just to be aware that the teacher's not the keeper of all knowledge, are they? It's about sharing.
Not.
So that's great. I love that you brought that up. Thanks. Now, the next thing is we're going to look at some strategies for developing open-ended questions. So the first strategy I like to use is answer first. But I'll give you a closed question first. You can see here the question says, if A equals 3, B equals -4 and C equals 2, calculate the following. Now, I'm a maths teacher and I love maths. And I look at that and I cannot be bothered doing that. I don't know about you guys. There's something about it that just feels like, what's the purpose
It's very
to it?
methodical, isn't it? There's nothing particularly engaging about it.
That's it. And I guess so for me, the cognitive engagement sort of is lacking there.
Yeah.
Another way of asking this same kind of question is to open it up by starting with the answer first. And that is to say, if A equals 3, B equals -4 and C equals 2 are substituted into an equation and it equals 20, what could the equation be? Now, if you have an idea of what it could be, please feel free to write it in the comments as well, so that way you can share it and we can just see the range of different ideas and answers that you can get. But Em, have you got any idea of what you might have?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go with something pretty simple off the bat here, and I'm going to say 2A plus 14 equals 20.
So 2A plus 14, so that means 2 times A being 3, so that's 2 times 3 is 6, plus 14 is 20. Fantastic. That's an equation that's true. Well done.
Great, thank you.
And you can see there that Em's given us one example, but there may be a range of different examples. So for example, you could actually have your students coming up with things that involve all 3 of the pronumerals, or that involve indices or brackets or any of the other operations as well. So there really is such a wide range of ways to tackle this problem, and it can really cater for a wide range of abilities. And I've actually done this with my students a couple of times, and I found that when doing this question, the students who have really struggled with working with algebra and substituting actually really try and focus and hone in on this particular skill, because they go, okay, well this is an easy one, but can I make it better? And that really was impressive to see these students, I guess, develop resilience and persistence in order to try and improve. And I think when getting students to share their different answers, you can then write them all up on the board and then have a conversation as a class about, well, which ones do we like the most? And why is that? You know, what's the most mathematically creative ones, I guess you could ask the students.
And creativity always gives us such a great insight into students' metacognition as well, doesn't it? You can really see the thinking that's occurring there.
Yeah, that's it, and getting them to think about their thinking.
Absolutely.
So the next one, it's still answer first, but here's another example. So you could have a question that looks like this, you know, calculate the area of the following rectangles. Once again, doesn't excite me. Another way of asking the question could be to open it up by saying, well, the area of a rectangle is 64 centimetres squared. What might its dimensions be?
Oh, over to me again. Okay, so I'm going to go with a pretty straightforward answer here and say 8 by 8.
8 by 8. What did you guys have at home? Did you think 8 by 8 straight away? Because that's what I thought of too. But there are other ones, as we know. You know, we could have 32 by 2, or 16 by 4 even. So there's other ones there. And as students come out with these, you could then say, well, how many are there? Can you find them all? What happens if I then change it to allowing, you know, a decimal place or a length with a decimal number? So, you know, what happens if one of the lengths is 2.5 centimetres? What would the other one be? There's really lots that you can do with it. And then eventually you can take it to the point where students can try and find the area that will give the lengths that will give the maximum area, or vice versa. What is the longest length that you could get? The next type of question, or the type of strategy that you could use to open up the questions within your classes, is to compare, categorise and contrast. For example, you can see here it says put these shapes into groups and discuss your answers. So there's a range of shapes there. Have a think about it. How would you group these shapes? What do you reckon, Em?
Well, lots of possible ways to group those shapes. I can see you could group them according to colour. You could group them according to 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional shapes. What else have we got coming through there? Some people are saying No, no one's saying anything.
So, I mean, you could also guess. So you talked about colour and 2 and 3D shapes. You could talk about the number of sides.
Absolutely.
You could talk about if they're round or if they're pointy. You know,
Yes,
there really is. So
you can start
much
looking at the number of angles that are in the shapes. Yeah,
that's exactly it.
Yep.
So there's so much that you could do, and getting students to group them and then say, all right, now you've done that, group them in another way, gets them to think about it from different angles, and the conversations that take place as well really can help students to explore the mathematics and the terminology that might come out of there in a much greater depth as well.
Yeah, we are having a few minor technical difficulties with the webinar, guys. So if you are asking questions, we'll try and come back to them later and answer them in the comments. So apologies if you've been chiming in, but at this point we're having a bit of difficulty seeing your answers there.
All right, let's go on to the next strategy that you can use when opening up questions within your class. And this one's another good one. It's called incorrect solution. So you give students a question and also an example answer. So it says, Jack was required to simplify the square root of 45a squared. Below is Jack's response to the question. And then what you might ask is, well, what do you like about it? And also, have you got any constructive feedback for Jack? Now, I like asking both of these questions because by asking what do you like about it, you get students to identify what's actually good and be aware of that when they go through and do the question. If we just focus on what can be improved, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that the student has internalised what's good about it so that they can replicate that again later themselves.
Yeah, it's that process of refinement, isn't it? So it's not just throwing out a bad answer and starting again. And we see that all too often when students want to hide their mistakes and cross everything out and use whiteout. Oh my goodness, whiteout is just the bane of every teacher's existence, I think.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we want them to be aware of where the process went wrong.
Yeah, that's it. And then, like you said, to improve on their mistakes. And then in terms of what constructive feedback might you have for Jack, well, when we look at that, it actually is pretty good, right? What he's done isn't actually incorrect. He just hasn't taken that further and simplified it further by simplifying the square root of 45. So, and that's just simplifying surds. Now, so you can see here that is, they can take it to a certain point, and by getting students to really analyse what's going on and then improve feedback, it just gets them thinking more about the skill that's required. All right, the next one is to ask how many ways. So for example, here's a typical question. You might have calculate 13 minus 7. Once again, really quite a straightforward type of question that you might get asked in maths. Another way of asking it is, explain why 9 minus negative 4 is equal to 13. So now we're not talking about what's the answer. I've given the answer, in fact, but why is that the case? How many ways can you explain it? I mean, Em, have you got a way that you can explain that?
That's a tricky one.
It is a hard one.
I think, the first thing that comes to my mind might be to contextualise this around perhaps money. And think about positive numbers as being profit and negative numbers as representing loss. So if I'm starting with $9 worth of profit, and I take away a potential loss of $4, then I'm essentially going to increase my profit to 13. So that's one way that I might use to explain it. Very nice.
So bringing it back to something that makes sense really can help out with explaining it to students and getting them to see it and make it relevant to their lives. I like it. I mean, there's many different ways that you can do it. You could use a number line as well, or you can use a model to be able to explain it. We're actually going to come out with a video very soon in regards to how you can explain this using a model, talking about positive and negative charges. So keep an eye out for that. Another type of way that you can, or another strategy that you can use to open up questions is to use a sometimes, always, or never type of question. And so a typical question that you might see is convert the following fractions to decimals. Well, to open it up, you could say, is a fraction always, sometimes, or never less than 1?
Over to me again.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to go with sometimes for this one because straight away in my mind has popped up improper fractions. I'm thinking about the fact that means that sometimes fractions are not less than 1.
Oh, okay. That's funny because when I first saw the question, I thought, nah, fractions are always less than 1. But then, when I thought about it more, I thought, okay, well, no, you do have improper fractions, so that can then lead to fractions being greater than 1. And then I thought, well, what about if they're negative? So then, therefore, they're less than 1. But then the next question comes up is, well, what proportion of fractions are more than 1 and what proportion of fractions are less than 1. And you could then have a conversation about with students. And then that leads on to a concept of infinity, which is, as you can see here, we're not just talking about fractions anymore, we're bringing in a range of things. It does.
Yeah. Pardon the pun.
And then, therefore, like, that's the whole point of the open-ended types of questions.
Yeah, it's great that just that one question sort of sparked all of that thinking around sort of defining what we mean by fractions as well. And it's great to allow students the opportunity to explore that for themselves.
That's it. The last method that I like to use in terms of opening up questions is to use manipulatives. Now, you may have seen in the video that went out just recently from Maths Pathway, we talked about how to multiply 12 by 13, and we used MAB to be able to do this. If you didn't see it, I'll just quickly show you here, as we can see, and you'll see that 12 by 13, you can see I've got 10 and 2 is 12, 10 and 3 is 13. So when I multiply them, a 10 by the 10 is 100, 10 by the 3 is 3 tens, 2 by the 10 is 2 tens, and then the 2 by the 3 is 6. So therefore I end up getting 156. Now, if I've gone through that really quickly, make sure you do go back and have a look at the video that came out yesterday. So you'll be able to find it on the Facebook page as well. And do watch it, because you can see there that there's actually, using manipulatives can actually help students to really understand what's actually occurring with the maths, rather than simply trying to make sense of an algorithm that really is quite challenging for them to get their head around.
Yes, and you'll find that video and lots of other engaging videos at our YouTube channel as well.
Yep, and also on the Community Hub, so
yes.
Check that out too. All right, so let's go and have a look at the different ways. These are just summing up what the different strategies that you can use in order to open up your questions. So you've got incorrect solution, work backwards from the answer, compare, categorise and contrast, solve a problem in multiple ways, always, sometimes or never questions, and also using manipulatives to try and get students to understand what's going on. This brings me on to now enabling and extending prompts. Now, enabling and extending prompts, you've got your open-ended question, great. You've thought about how can I open this task up to make it so that students can have many different answers or approach it in many different ways. That's brilliant. But you're probably going to start off with just the one question for all students, because it's hard to ask. You can't ask more than one question at once, really. It's you ask the whole class one question and then they have a think about it. And this is where enabling and extending prompts can come into play. Now, do you want to talk about the purpose of them?
Yeah, sure. I suppose it's worth revisiting the fact that we're talking about open learning, which the idea of that is to really have students from multiple abilities working together as well. So we're really finding ways that we can begin, as Tom said, begin with the one question, but then use specific prompts that are going to meet the needs of the students that we have working together in that class or in that group. So when we're talking about an enabling prompt, we're talking about a specific type of question which is going to help those students who may be at the sort of lower end and maybe struggling a little bit to actually access the question or access the problem. So it's things that are going to give them that little bit of scaffolding that they might need to be able to approach that particular problem. When we're talking about extending prompts, we're looking at ways that we can take that thinking further. So once again, we want every student who's involved in the activity to be challenged by it. So there's no point for those students who can already do it and could do it from the moment they walked in the classroom. If they're not being challenged in some way, they're not gaining anything from it. They're not going to have that sense of achievement and that sense of completion at the end of the task. So we really want to extend their thinking in some way as well.
So essentially it's one task, but you differentiate the task, not the students. We don't put students into groups as such, we differentiate the task.
Absolutely.
And then all students can access the task. All right, well, let's have a look at some strategies now that you can use in terms of developing enabling prompts and extending prompts. First of all, for enabling prompts, you can change the numbers. So if you're dealing with something like 12 times 13 and the students aren't understanding, maybe you could bring in something along the lines of 4 times 6 and getting them to work with some smaller numbers. It's still the same concept, but at a much smaller level. Or you could bring in manipulatives as well, like I did with the MAB before, and quite often just using that to try and help them to understand what's actually occurring. It gives them just enough confidence to make a start with it. The other thing that you could use is questions requiring metacognition, and that is where you get students to think about what thinking they've already done. And these types of questions might be something along the lines of, well, what have you already tried? Whereabouts are you stuck? What can you do up to? So you're getting students to think about, well, where they're at and what it is exactly, or getting them to articulate what it is exactly that they're struggling with. And by doing that, quite often it can actually answer some of their questions for them. They just hadn't thought about it in a different way. So it's thinking about the thinking that can really help them and push them in the right direction. In terms of extending prompts, I kind of touched on these before throughout the different open-ended questions or the different strategies. And that is, you can use things like what happens if. What happens if I change the area that I'm looking for of that rectangle before? Is that going to create more different possibilities, or is it going to create less? What happens if I bring in side links that have a decimal number? Is that going to change what we're looking at? How many solutions are there? And also, how will I know when I've found them all? Those kind of go in hand, because as students realise that there's more than one solution, and then you ask them, how do you know when you found them all? Well, they have to go through it and work through it systematically, which is quite a fair bit more in depth, really, when getting students to explore the problem. Now, in terms of when working with enabling and extending prompts, there's a few do's and don'ts. The first do is to give every student the same question initially. So you want students to all have the same opportunity to experience the mathematics, because students will be limited by what they have the opportunity to experience. So we want all students to experience the opportunity to participate in high quality or high level mathematics. Now, give them 5 minutes, every student 5 minutes, to go through and attempt this question. And as you're doing this, just simply wander the room and take note of what's happening. Are students using different strategies? Are some students finding it easy? Are some students finding it more difficult? Do not jump in straight away. Let them have their 5 minutes of struggle. Because if we jump in straight away and say, all right, I'm going to change the task for you, well, we kind of teach forced helplessness in some ways, because some students go, okay, well, I don't need to worry about this higher end question. The teacher's going to tell me how to do it straight away anyway, and then they don't even try. So we want students to experience that struggle first, and then go through, and then we can get students to share their thinking afterwards.
And it's so important for students to develop that resilience as well. I think it, as Tom pointed out, it can be tempted to jump in and sort of save them, or sometimes as teachers we can be a little bit scared of silent time or wait time. It can feel like it's a signal that students don't understand. But I think it is important that they have both the time and space to think, and also the ability to experience that struggle and to see that as a challenge that's worth working through.
And it's so much more rewarding when they get it after they've experienced the struggle as well. The next thing to think about is these tasks, like I said before, or the enabling prompts and the extending prompts, that is how we differentiate. So every student has the same task, but we use these. We don't actually change the task entirely. We just simply change the questions within it, and that's how we differentiate. And then the last thing to bring it back to is get students to discuss the different strategies that they've used, both after the 5 minutes and then throughout the courses of the class as well. So it might be maybe one more time after that, just to give students a way of thinking, oh, I haven't tried that, let me try that now. And also at the very end, so you can wrap it up so that students leave thinking, okay, this is what I've been able to achieve today. In terms of the don'ts when it comes to enabling and extending prompts, don't jump in, like I said before, and give an enabling or extending prompt within 5 minutes. Enabling prompts, like I said, you want students to experience that struggle. But in terms of extending prompts, well, the task should be challenging enough for students to actually take 5 minutes to go through and do it too. So quite often, 5 minutes is a really good time for you to just walk around and see what's happening within the class. Also, try not to give away the answers, as Em said before. As a teacher, it really is tempting. You want to see your students succeed. You want to help them out. That's why we got into the job in the first place, was to help students. But don't give them the answers, and even giving them too much questioning can really take away the ownership from them. So those first 5 minutes, make sure you allow them to work silently, and also it's really important that they work alone silently during that time too, so that they're not getting ideas from each other, because what you'll find is if you get students working together straight away, that one student will take ownership of it and control, and the other student's more than happy to take a back seat and let them do the work.
Yeah, and that ownership and agency from students is such an important and integral part of their engagement as well. And as Tom mentioned earlier, it's not the role of the teacher to be the answer key and to hold, all of the secrets. It's really important that students are encouraged to develop the right questions and the skills to look for those answers themselves.
Yeah, and by giving them those 5 minutes to work alone silently, it means that they invest themselves all of a sudden into the problem, And then when it comes time to sharing the strategies, they actually can relate that back to what they've already thought of. So let's bring it all together now. In terms of what we talked about with engagement before and engagement and success, well, I like to think of, we've got engagement and success here. I think of cognitive engagement as being really important in terms of experiencing success, because if they're not cognitively engaged, if they're finding the work too easy but they can do it, is that really what we call success? I really think that, you know, for students to feel successful, they need to first feel challenged. And once they feel challenged and can achieve that, then that's where they'll experience success. And in terms of that, we need to then think about, well, if we give every student the same question, that means that not every student's going to have opportunity for success. So that's where we bring in the enabling and the extending prompts to ensure that every student has that opportunity. And then they get to experience success. And through doing that, you can then build in opportunities for, once they experience success, they'll be more likely to see how it's relevant to their lives outside of school. And also, they'll be happier to go through and work at an operative level to just simply do the work.
And that success itself can act as a real motivator for students, can't it? When they sort of first experience that accomplishment that comes from knowing that you've gone into a task and you've really worked at it and learnt something new. And as Tom said, it's that definition of success is not just being able to do something, but being able to do something after a challenge or after experiencing something new.
So this brings us to towards the end of the presentation, but I'd like you to have a think about these two questions and how can we possibly open these up and in order to be able to engage students. Now these are two quite closed questions. So you've got sketch the graphs of the following functions. They're all linear equations as you can see. And then what shape does this net make? Now when thinking about opening up these questions, I like to ask myself 3 questions. And I really believe, because I've had a number of people say to me before, how are you creative with doing this? And I really believe, like anything, creativity is something you can learn. And you can learn it through asking questions. So if you don't ask yourself questions, you're not going to be creative. That's the process that's required. And in terms of that, well, these are the questions that I ask. First of all, can I open the question, or whatever I'm going to teach, can I use one of the strategies that we've discussed in order to open up the question? Now, certain strategies will align themselves better with different skills. So can I use an incorrect solution or starting with the answer for either of those two? Or is there another strategy there that's more appropriate to use? When I look at this, in fact, I'll come back to it later. The next question that I then ask, so once I've thought about a way to open up the question, well, I then think about, now I've got that way, I need to come up with how am I going to enable and extend students? And also, what might the sticking points be for students? So once I've given them the question, how can I make it easier for students if they've struggled for the first 5 minutes? And also, when students finish, because some students may finish it a little bit faster than others, what's the next step for them? And you'll know when to give that question because they'll say, oh, I've done this. And you'll have a look at it and you'll say, yes, you have. Here's the next question. And
yes, I love that idea of the removing that end point as well when we're looking at open learning, because you always have those students in the class who just rush to a correct solution and say, I'm done. And it's sort of removing that aspect of it, isn't it? We're really opening it up, and there's no such thing as finished because we can always keep extending in some way.
Especially, like with these open questions. And the last question I like to think of is, how else can I try and engage students? And that quite often is through presentation. So what kind of presentation elements can I bring into it to really sort of put the icing on the cake? You know, can I take students outside? Is it going to improve the quality of my lesson? Can I bring in manipulatives? Can I, do anything really to engage students and make them really want to invest their time in what it is that I'm running with my class? And think about that in terms of the cognitive, affective, and also the operative domains as well.
And I suppose that comes back to those pedagogical relationships once again, doesn't it? The more you know your students, the more you'll be able to work out the ways that you can engage them. So what's going to work for the students that you have? Absolutely.
Really, the pedagogical relationships and the pedagogical repertoires, they are also a cyclic nature. One will affect the other and improve the other. So working on the relationships in particular can help out those. But also, how do you work on the relationships? Well, it's through the repertoires that you use too. So starting with either one really is a good idea.
And those open learning opportunities are a great place to develop those pedagogical relationships as well, because of course you've got students engaging and interacting with one another. And as a teacher, as Tom's mentioned a couple of times, you're able to go around and get a much better in-depth insight into the way that your students tackle a task and the type of thinking that they're applying to tasks as well.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of coming back to those two questions, you may have come up with some strategies in the comments. If you haven't, I've got a couple that you might want to use. So for example, I look at the first one, I've got 4 different ways or 4 different graphs there. Maybe I might get them to compare, categorise and contrast them. So that is, I might get them to sketch the graphs first of all and then compare, categorise and contrast in terms of, well, what have they got in common? What's different about them? And when you look at that, well, the gradients and the y-intercepts are going to change. Okay, so what is it that changes? How do those change in regards to the numbers? So you're really starting to get students to look at it and analyse what's actually occurring. And in terms of the net one, well, when we fold it up, we know that makes a cube. But then what happens if I started with the cube and got students to just unfold it? And we ended up with, okay, well, what different nets will happen when you unfold a cube? There's a range of different answers that you could possibly get there. And then when you ask students, well, how many solutions are there? And how do you know when you've got them all? Well, we know then that that's quite a deep level of skill and quite a deep level of thinking that's required there. So in terms of what we've covered today, we've looked at the 3 forms of engagement. So that is cognitive, behavioural, cognitive, operative, and also affective. And then we've also looked at strategies for opening up questions, as well as enabling and extending prompts as well. Now, in terms of different resources that you might want to use, I've read these 3 books and I feel like they're really great and really pertinent to what we've discussed today. That is, challenging mathematical tasks and open-ended maths activities. They're written by Peter Sullivan and Pat Lilburn. So they're really good for different types of activities and tasks that you can use within your class the very next day. Whereas the other book that I really enjoyed reading was Teach Like a Pirate, and that gets you to go through the process of developing your creativity. That is, asking questions to promote creative lessons within your classroom.
And we've talked about success and engagement and the cycle of that within the classroom for students, but I think it's as much of a cycle for teachers as well. And strategies like those that are discussed in Teach Like a Pirate can be a great source of inspiration and engagement for teachers. And once you start experiencing success with those particular strategies, that sort of serves to foster that engagement even more.
That's it. When I read that book, I could not help but get excited about going in and trying it with my classes. It was just like, oh, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this. It really was really exciting, and that is, through asking those questions and being creative, that can really help out with that process. All right, so we've got a couple of things in terms of slides and all of that type of stuff. We'll put the link for the slides in the comments below. Also, we've got the Maths Pathway stuff. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, if you're joining us today and you're not already a Maths Pathway school and you're interested in finding out more, please head on to our website. You can make contact with us, and someone from our partnerships or school consulting team will be in touch with you. Again, our Path 18, which is coming up on the 28th and 29th of June. So that's a fantastic opportunity for Maths Pathway teachers to come along and discuss and get some great ideas to take back to the classroom. We've deliberately held that event in the middle of the year because we know that there's going to be so many things that you take back from that and want to get started applying in your own classes for the remainder of the year as well.
I'm really disappointed. I'm going to be in South America, so I won't be able to make it to
sure
that.
You're very disappointed.
No, I am. Well, I mean, I love South America, but I also would love to be there too. And if you want to get, or if you're interested in getting in touch with me, you can do that by emailing me at t.moore@engagingmathematics.com. I go out to schools and I run different PD sessions and can work with your math staff as well to help them in terms of engaging your students, and also run any kind of open-ended tasks or anything along those lines that you might be interested in running or happening more at your school too.
And those of you who are joining us from current Maths Pathway schools today who are interested in sort of looking more into this whole concept of bringing open learning and open-ended tasks into your classrooms, feel free, as we've said a couple of times, to head over to the Community Hub to open discussions with other teachers about how to do that as well, or reach out to your school consultant.
All right, I think that's pretty much it from us, isn't it, Em?
I think so.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.